And so let me get started. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us. What we're going to do now is move into our track four, which is about ethical AI and responsible technology. This track is where we're going to explore how emerging technologies can support human flourishing while protecting mental health, justice, and public trust. As AI becomes more integrated into our lives every day, the question is no longer what these systems can do, but how are they designed, governed, and aligned with human values? To begin this conversation, we're joined by our Track 4 keynote speaker, Dr. Damian Eke. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Forgive me if I'm not, okay? Who is an associate professor at the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom, and a global authority on ethics and the governance of AI and neurotechnology. So join me in welcoming Dr. Eke.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk and be part of the conversation. Great conversation so far, so good today. Um, I've been given a difficult task to talk about human flourishing and AI. I will try my best to say something about it. Damian Eke, basically working on ethics and governance of emerging technologies, particularly AI. So my talk is going to focus on AI for human flourishing in Africa. But the most important question is who's flourishing and who's AI? So I'm going to do what we usually do in Africa, use proverbs to explain a lot of things. So bear with me. One is it's the one on the screen. Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And I will come back to this maybe at the end of the presentation, but it's important for us to bear this in mind as we continue. So, in the past few years, of past 2 decades now, we have had over responsible AI, trustworthy AI, just AI, AI for good, safe AI, robust AI, inclusive AI, sustainable AI, green AI, human-centered AI, ethical AI as the organizers used, and fair AI, algorithmic fairness, explainable AI. All these concepts were developed in the context of the global north and with underlying epistemologies and ontologies from the global north, and also accountable AI. But there are assumptions underlying each of them, or all of them, actually. One of these assumptions is the assumption that of universality of moral concepts, because they assume that concepts like responsibility, fairness, justice, human flourishing mean the same across cultures or societies, which is wrong. There's also another assumption of shared vision of human flourishing. There's a presumption that a common understanding of what it means to live a good life, often rooted in the global North philosophical traditions, it's shared across societies. Also, at the same time, there is an assumption that data is neutral and universal. There's an assumption that data that define AI or that underlines AI it represents reality objectively and can be applied across different cultural or social environments without distortion. Uh, in addition to this, there are also assumptions of institutional trust as a given. I think this has been mentioned in sparingly today. There's a presence of a stable institutional capable to enforce ethical principles. And the idea that there is linear progressive or progress narrative of AI, that AI is inherently progressive in as much as we govern it properly. And then There's also this idea of technological solutionism, right? We throw technology into every problems that we have across the world. It assumes that ethical issues can be addressed primarily through technical fixes. In most of my computer science models, we talk about debias and algorithms, or maybe explainability tools that we can develop to solve these ethical problems in AI. But the underlying thing here for us to understand that these are assumptions and they do not represent facts or reality. So what we have done with a group of researchers in Africa is to do what we call a multivocal literature review to understand this narrative or this framing of responsible AI or trustworthy AI across the world, right? And we identified loads of peer-reviewed literature, loads of documents that are non-peer-reviewed, non-academic, maybe organizational statements on responsible AI. And we analyzed, at the end, we analyzed 45 reports, both academic and non-academic documents. So what did we find? Well, and most some of these literature includes some of the works I've also published. These are two of my edited works. They were part of the reviewed documents and also works by Yato Gwagwa or myself. But what we found was that in the global narrative of responsible AI, there is these assumptions that which are pointed out earlier that values and principles and benefits of AI are can universally be understood. And there is a robust infrastructure for AI across board. And there are the regulatory frameworks, uh, whether new ones or already existing ones, can address ethical issues in AI. And there are diverse data sets, and the issues of sustainability are addressed, and the relevant expertise in AI is already in place for advancements of AI. So what we also then found in the literature published by Africans or authors from the global south was that if you peel these narratives apart, there are underlying or missing narratives in the framing of responsible AI or global responsible AI. Because in terms of values and principles, the values underlying AI ethics, AI governance, African values and principles are lacking. And also, in terms of the robust infrastructure that we think about in AI, there are colonial tendencies. There are the issue of what we call coloniality, not colonialism, is a carefully worded word there. Coloniality, which is the continuous colonial tendencies that exist beyond the true colonial era, right? And also, in terms of regulatory frameworks, there are lack of locally grounded regulations for AI in Africa. And this is very concerning because I've been part of AI, national AI strategies, both for Nigeria and other countries in Africa. Even now, the new emerging effort to regulate AI or to build strategies for AI are absolutely controlled by the global north because most of these efforts are funded by the big tech companies. And then there are lack of African data sets that underline the AI system. And that is why most of the AI models that are now being used in Africa do not speak to our African languages because our data sets are lacking in them. And also, in terms of sustainability, there are unethical sourcing or resource extraction that underline AI infrastructure, or lithium and other natural resources that actually shape AI infrastructure are extracted from Africa unethically without equal benefits to Africa. And then e-waste dumping, and there's also energy consumption. We're now seeing so many data centers being built in Africa without actually considering the ecological issues that come with all this. And then Africa still lack expertise to be on the table for AI. Because if you watch the landscape of AI patents, I think You will go to maybe number 50 without seeing any African country in terms of having maybe a few AI patents for the country. And then lack of African languages. So these are the realities that we found in literature published by African authors. So what we can then ask is, who is writing the story of AI and whose flourishing does it serve? If AI systems are being developed to serve humanity, to actually help human flourishing, and if our data sets are not involved, if our values are not embedded in the design of these systems, if regulatory frameworks do not align with our realities and expectations, whose flourishing does it serve? So the idea of universalization of this responsible AI, which I pointed out earlier, that is in the global narrative of responsible AI, is that it ignores crucial cultural and historical context. In one of the works I've published, an important quotation I have there is that we cannot, no one can develop AI systems without Africa. We AI systems cannot be developed for Africa without Africa. So our cultural context, our cultural expectations and realities will have to be embedded in the design and development of these systems. Um, Another point here is that it marks inherent power asymmetries in AI development. If we understand responsible AI from a universal lens, it absolutely marks the inherent power asymmetries in AI. There is the AI race happening, right? And we have to understand that the benefits of AI is not going to be handed to us on a platter as Africans. We need to fight for it. We need to actually know what we deserve in AI ecosystem and actually stake our case for that. And also, it risks ethical homogenization or stifling diverse perspectives because the way we understand ethical issues, ethical principles, and values are not the same as other regions of the world. And so we need to understand that we don't need to homogenize ethical risk or ethical principles or values for AI. And finally, it promotes digital colonialism, and that is maybe a major conversation we can have. So when this the narrative I'm trying to paint here is that what African authors or scholars are trying to do is to deconstruct the global narrative of responsible AI. And what our study reveals is that the music has changed. We have deconstructed it, right? So if the music changes, who does so does the dance, right? And that's an African proverb. So if AI is playing and changing the music, who decides how Africa dances, right? It has to be us. It has to be us that actually decides how Africa dances in this AI ecosystem. So now what we need to do as Africans is to reimagine the global narrative of responsible AI in such a way that we have to understand or make sure that the data sets that are shaping AI systems reflect relevant stakeholder interests and context in Africa. And also, the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders are clearly defined in Africa in terms of helping the society to flourish. And also making sure that there are locally grounded governance mechanisms that are not dictated to us by the global north. Um, an example of this will be in developing a national strategy of a country in Nigeria, I'm not going to mention, there were European Union representatives in the room, and they were trying to push the risk-based approach of AI governance, right? And we were all buying it. Most people were all buying it. And that means that what we are trying to do in terms of developing these regulatory frameworks can be shaped by these people. And this is in Brussels, they call it Brussels effect, which is a completely different political undertone that we can discuss later. And then understand that there needs to be a continuous critical look at the concept of responsible AI because it's not a static concept. It is a concept that is a moving target, can actually be reimagined following improvements in or development in AI ecosystem. And also, we need to focus on eco justice and green innovation in the sense that the natural mining of natural resources that define the AI infrastructure will have to benefit Africa and not an extractive practices. And then, most importantly, we don't need to present the responsible AI as a universal concept, but as a pluriversal concept of understanding values and principles that speak to us rather than ones that do not speak to us. And finally, I was very careful to put it in at the last, which is decolonized AI life cycle. We need to understand that for us to make AI systems work for us, we need to decolonize it because the underlying coloniality problem of AI is something that we can't solve actually in a few months, in a year or two, because these are structural problems that we need to talk about in terms of data, in terms of the personnel that actually defining algorithms, in terms of the infrastructure behind AI systems. So how can we then do that? How can we decolonize the AI innovation lifecycle? In a recent paper I published with a few colleagues, an important pathway to flourishing in Africa as regards AI is about maybe adopting the tool of decoloniality impact assessment, making sure that we assess all AI systems being developed in and for Africa in such a way that we make sure that all coloniality problems are resolved and it speaks to our culture, it speaks to our cultural context, it speaks to our values, it speaks to our expectations, it speaks to our needs in Africa rather than speaking to the needs and realities of stakeholders in the global south, in the global north. So now, coming back to the earlier proverb that I put out earlier. So, until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. So, as Africans, we need to learn how to define and shape the narrative of AI systems being developed in and for Africa. Because if we don't, somebody else is going to write it and it's not going to reflect our realities. It's not going to reflect our needs. It's not going to reflect our psychological or cognitive needs and realities. So one last one is that for us to go with is that the one who fetches the water is the one who knows where the well is. It is important for us to understand that Africans need to define how African AI systems are designed, developed, deployed, and built, and also governed, rather than depending on realities and maybe needs or realities in the global north. And that was my last slide. I was just acknowledging a few of my affiliations and also
Yeah.
funders or funded projects that actually lead to some of these discussions. Thank you very much.
Beautiful, beautiful, very nice. Okay. So, Chimea Sonia, please unmute and ask your one question. We've got 1 minute.
Okay, thank
All
you
right.
so much, Doctor. First, I hope I can contact you because I would love to go into this a little bit more. Um, Colonials exist in different aspects of health, well-being, and AI, but I think we use the word a lot and we don't understand the impact. And so that's why I want to elevate in this conversation. For instance, you mentioned the Brussels discussion around trying to implement risk-based strategies, but is that bad? Right? You mentioned it as an example. Is that bad? We mentioned colonialism in this space, but is it bad? What actually make these things worrying and bad? Not just as a word that we deploy, but actually how it impacts us in the future in ways that are negative.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the risk-based approach, right? In understanding my answer, you have to understand the landscape of governance approaches for AI. There is the risk-based approach, there's the rights-based approach, there's the value-based approach, and if you go to the US or the UK, there is the all eyes and no hands no hands approach, which is the pro-innovation approach without regulation. So In Africa, we need to, first of all, understand which approach works for us rather than trying to extrapolate from what the EU has already done because it works for them and we believe that it can work for us. In my studies and in my research, the risk-based approach is a good one, but I believe what we need to prioritize is the value-based approach. Because if we do not understand, because the risk-based approach actually started with value-based and they graduated from there to the risk-based. Now people are seeing the EU AI Act as a risk-based governance mechanism without understanding that the underlying or fundamental principles that actually shaped that was the value-based approach. So it's important for us to understand that. For me, I will go for Africans, and Africa is not a monolithic community anyway. For Africa, I think the value-based approach to AI governance is one I will recommend rather than the risk-based approach. So, and then going back to colonialism, okay, I do not often use the word colonialism. I use coloniality, right? Which is completely different from colonialism, and people confuse that a lot. Coloniality is the continued colonial tendencies that are happening now with institutional or structural inequalities, right? And in AI, we need to understand what elements of coloniality are there. And when we mention coloniality or colonialism, is about the extractive nature or extractive practices that underline colonialism. The fact that these practices are also governed by realities in the global north, and they are exported from the governance is exported from the global north to the global south, and that is exactly what is happening. And also, an example would be data, right? So most often, the data sets that underline AI systems are generated from Africa without equal benefits to Africa. That is extractive practice. That is an element of coloniality, right? And that is something that we need to solve. So understanding the elements of coloniality in AI innovation lifecycle is one way of addressing these issues. And if you read the paper that I mentioned earlier, which is the decoloniality impact assessment, there's a long list of examples of coloniality in the AI innovation lifecycle in Africa that we need to solve. So, which is a long list, as I said, is a long list. But one is data, which I've talked about, the extractive practices of data. People have called it data colonialism or maybe algorithmic colonialism, but we need to understand this landscape of these issues before we talk about solving them.